Welcome to the business interview. I'm Markus Karlsson. The French Prime Minister billed it as a political earthquake. Eurosceptic parties seized ground in last weekend's European elections. In France, the Front National and its leader Marine Le Pen took a quarter of the vote. In response, European leaders pledged to streamline the European Union. French President François Hollande said he wants to refocus Europe's attention on boosting growth. What do these latest political turns actually mean for the euro and for the wider Eurozone economy? To answer that question, we can turn to Lorenzo Bini Smaghi, who's with us from Rome. He's a former member of the European Central Bank's Executive Board. He's also a scholar at Harvard and a chairman of the board at the natural gas network Snam in Italy. Thank you very much, Mr. Bini Smaghi, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, let me first ask you about the European elections. What's your reaction to the advance of Eurosceptic parties in the elections? Will it shape or change the Eurozone economy?
Certainly, Eurosceptics have made a way forward, but on several cases in several countries, it has been also a vote against the ruling party. So it's not only maybe a criticism of Europe as such, but it's a criticism of the domestic political elite and a request for change.
But even if this was just a protest vote, though, as it may have been, you know the insides of the European Union's decision-making. Will the Eurosceptic lawmakers in the European Parliament, the growing group of Eurosceptic lawmakers in the European Parliament, make a difference when it comes to policy making?
Well, it will certainly push the policymakers to take into account the Eurosceptics. I think in the Parliament it will push the various parties pro-Europe to work together. It will push the European leaders to think more about what needs to be done to get the economy growing. I don't think it will affect much the ECB in itself. But certainly in those institutions which are more political, the need to take into account and to address the criticisms will be there and will push the pro-Europeans to do more.
What do you think that European leaders have to do to take the criticism into account? They're saying that they want to boost growth, but how do they do that at a European level?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion right now. Many of the instruments that are needed to boost growth are actually in the competence of the national authorities. If I think about labor market reforms, if I think about Italy in particular, the judicial system, the bureaucracy, research, development, education, all these are in the competence of the national authorities. So what can be done at the European level? Maybe some relaunching of public investments, think about energy in particular, but also the single market. This needs more Europe. But I noticed that in some countries the reaction to the election has been now to rethink about how much power should be given to Europe and maybe how much should be given back to the member states. But I don't think that by giving back powers to the member state you will get more growth.
Mm-hmm. I want to focus a little bit on Italy because the election result in Italy was a little bit different from the rest of Europe. The ruling Democratic Party and Prime Minister Matteo Renzi scored a big win. Do you think that's going to translate into bolder reform in Italy?
Well, certainly Renzi got into power wanting to make reforms, to accelerate the reform process. And this result is certainly an encouragement by the people and a big hope by the people that he will do so. So that's a clear message for him, and I think he can bring this message in the parliament to push forward. I think that was a big difference with other countries where the Eurosceptics maybe were able to bring forward a message of, Europe is not letting us do what we want. Here, the message was, we want you to do what you need to do as a government to make Italy more competitive.
Now, there is this discussion going on in Europe. I hesitate to call it a debate, but there is a discussion on what country in Europe is the weak point, so to speak, of the Eurozone? There's been talk of Italy being the sick man of Europe. Now more and more people perhaps are pointing at France being the sick man of Europe, seeing the election results. What do you make of that debate? Which country in the Eurozone should we be watching when it comes to being the Achilles heel, so to speak?
Well, you know, you have the economic dimension and you have the political dimension. In economic dimension, there are a few weak spots, and certainly Italy is among them. But when you look at the political aspect, so the need for change, the willingness to change, it seems to me that Italy has moved from the bottom because it is weak economically, but at least it is willing to change. I think there are other countries which may be not that weak economically yet, but the willingness to change is less evident, and there is a risk of more paralysis politically, which will lead economically to a worse situation going forward.
And when you say other countries, are you referring to France?
Well, maybe. I'm a bit worried when I see the reaction in France that the best way to deal with these results is less Europe. I think that's not the way forward. We need more Europe to deal with the challenges of growth. The reaction to say, we're going to try to match the challenge of the Eurosceptics by getting back some of our powers, our freedom to do more, I don't think will lead France to grow more, actually.
But what do you make of the argument of the Eurosceptics? Often, many of them, they're pointing the finger at austerity, for instance, and they say that, look, austerity pushed by the European Union, it simply hasn't worked.
Maybe it was not really pushed by the European Union. It was, a last resort choice by those countries which did not put their public finances in order in good times. And, if I look to France, there hasn't really been a lot of austerity so far, and there is a lot of gradualism in the adjustment. But I think we all agree that the time is to think about growth, about reforms. So how many countries are ready to reform and to really make their economies more competitive, change the structure of their capital markets, labor markets, good markets, more competition? Which countries are really willing to do that?
I want to change tack a little bit and talk about the European Central Bank. In the coming week, the ECB's Governing Council will be meeting. Expectations have been building that the ECB will take action to boost the Eurozone economy and try to encourage inflation. What are your expectations ahead of the ECB meeting on Thursday?
Well, I think the expectation now is that the ECB will act. Inflation is much below the targets. So, on current trends, the ECB is missing its target, so it has to act. It has announced a series of action, or at least it has led the markets to forecast a series of measures. The key issue is, will these measures work? And I think in order for these measures to work with respect to inflation and growth will these measures be able to lead to a weaker euro in terms of exchange rates? Because in the end, that's the way you get more inflation, that's the way you get more growth. So the key challenge will be, after the June meeting, how much will these measures have an impact on the exchange rate? And if not, what else the ECB will be ready to do in the coming months to make sure that inflation will go up to the target of 2%.
I don't want to become too technical, but what kind of action do you think will be taken by the ECB? There's been talk of lower interest rates. There's also been talk of the ECB taking a page out of the Federal Reserve's playbook and printing money to buy bonds in the markets. What kind of action are you expecting, and how radical do you expect that action to be?
Well, I expect, in the June meeting, there will be an announcement about cutting interest rates, maybe the deposit rates of banks going to negative territory, more financing to the banking system, especially trying to encourage this financing to go to the private sector, small and medium-sized enterprises, other measures to increase the liquidity. I'm not sure they will be willing to go really the extra step already of doing so-called quantitative easing, that is buying assets in the markets, especially if you want to buy large amounts of assets, you need to buy government bonds, and I'm not sure the ECB is ready yet to do that. But if the measures that will be implemented next week will not be effective, then the next step will have to be the purchase of government bonds, like the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England or the Bank of Japan have already done.
Some people say that the credibility of the ECB, of the European Central Bank, is really at stake here. Do you agree with that? Do you think that the ECB has to come out with something, whatever it is, otherwise its credibility could be hurt?
Well, I would say no. So far, if you look at the average of the first 12, 13 years of ECB activity, the result is an inflation rate around 2%. So it is on target. Now, the risk is that, more months pass by without inflation picking up. And if this is the case, there may be a risk of inflation expectations, disanchoring from this 2%, and market participants starting to doubt about the ECB being able to achieve this goal. I don't think the situation is as such right now, but going forward, unless the ECB acts very decisively, there is a risk. But I don't see this risk right now, and I think the ECB will take the right actions over the next weeks to make sure that its credibility will not be impaired.
All right, Lorenzo Bini Smaghi, it has been a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here at France 24. And with that, we're going to be wrapping up this edition of the Business Interview. Stay with us for more news.